Welcome, everyone. My name is Duncan Delano. I am an attorney at Emerge Law Group. My practice focuses on cannabis regulatory compliance and licensing, as well as commercial real estate transactions and general corporate work. We are a full-service business firm with particular expertise in highly regulated industries like cannabis, psychedelics, beer, wine, distilled spirits. With offices from coast to coast. But today we'll be focusing on New York. We're really at the beginning of the regulated market here in New York with 3 licenses available now or imminently, and still kind of TBD on when the rest of the licenses will roll out. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we'll be talking about conditional cultivators, processors, and retailers. Gotta figure out there's the button. So what we're covering today is what is being called the Seeding Opportunity Initiative. And that really consists of 3 programs. The first is the Farmers First program, where existing hemp farmers and processors, or cultivators and processors, can be authorized to switch into cannabis. The second is the Equity Owners Lead program, where folks with marijuana convictions in New York, either themselves or within their immediate family, might be eligible to apply for the first retail licenses that will be available. That one is still in the draft regulation phase. We're waiting for final regulations, so still details to come. And the third is the Social Equity Investment Program, which consists of a $200 million fund that will be administered through the Dormitory Authority of the state of New York. What we're not covering is any other license types, delivery, consumption lounge, all the other license types that were authorized under the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, MRTA. We don't yet have draft regulations out for the rest of those licenses. We're still waiting on those, and I can't really tell you when they're going to come. I'm not holding my breath. My ears, my birdies tell me that the Office of Cannabis Management is pretty underfunded and staffed at the moment, and we are in an election year, so there's some turmoil and staffing issues preventing the rollout of the rest of the regulations. But in the meantime, New York is plowing forward with these 3 programs to get the adult use market up and running. So more specifically, I'll talk about the different license types and the eligibility criteria, what activities are permitted under each license, the ongoing program requirements for each license, and license prioritization within the application process. I'll give you a quick summary of application materials that are due to apply for each license. And then I'll talk a bit about what we know so far about the New York Social Equity Fund and DASNY's administration of providing properties for the conditional retailers. And then I'll leave you with some quick facts and key dates to come. And of course, let you know how to get in touch with me. So let's start with the adult use conditional cultivators. So to be eligible for this license, the applicant needs to be at least 51% owned by a hemp licensee. So a cultivator who is authorized under the Department of Agriculture and Markets Industrial Hemp Program, and has grown hemp for 2 out of the last 4 years. So 2018, 19, 2020, or 2021, 2 out of those 4 years. And this is a conditional temporary license, which is valid for 2 years, at which point you can cultivate cannabis during that time, fully permitted to cultivate and sell and process cannabis, as I'll get into, but it's a conditional temporary license, and you can apply for a full permanent license after the end of that 2-year conditional period. And fairly similar is the adult use conditional processor license. Little easier to qualify for this one. You just need to have applied for a hemp license before January of this year, and hold an active hemp license, processing license. And again, this is another conditional temporary license that will allow you to process and distribute cannabis products for up to 2 years, and then you can apply to get a permanent license. And finally, the conditional adult use retail dispensary license. And just a quick caveat, this is what I'm telling you now for the eligibility criteria, permitted activities, so on and so forth. All comes from the draft regulations, which were issued in March. The public comment period ended at the end of May, and we're now awaiting the final regulations. The Office of Cannabis Management has to take all the public comments, some of which we submitted, and I'm sure some of you all submitted, and take those into consideration and then issue the final regulations. So we'll see what changes from what I tell you here to the final set of rules when they come out. And as I tell you later, we're kind of expecting those this summer. You know, I would be surprised if it were this month, but I think July or August is pretty realistic. All right. All right, so what are the permitted activities? Adult use cultivators, you can grow outdoors up to 1 acre, which is 43,560 square feet, or in a greenhouse up to 25,000 square feet. There are certain canopy size restrictions in there as well. Or if you want to grow outdoors and indoors, you can have up to 20,000 square feet in a greenhouse, and a total of 30,000 square feet. So no more between the outdoor and indoor than 30,000 square feet combined. This license also allows you to process cannabis without a processor license and distribute it without a distributor license until June 1st of 2023. After that period, you will need to get a processor. If you are a conditional cultivator, you need to get a new processor and distributor license if you want to continue those activities. Of course, that sort of suggests that those licenses will be available by then. Let's cross our fingers for that. But it's sort of limited processing what you can do. You can't do extraction activities, but you can, process, pre-rolls and other sort of, consumer packaged cannabis products, but no extraction. Permitted activities for the processor, kind of similar, process and manufacture cannabis products, and distribute the products without a distributor license until June 1st of next year. And you can only do extraction if your current hemp permit includes authorization to do hemp extraction. So that would be permitted if you are able to do that now under your hemp license. And when we say distribute, basically what that means is you'll be able to distribute these products to these new conditional retailers, because the beginning of the market will be these conditional cultivators, conditional processors, and conditional retailers. There won't be any wholesalers or distributors or delivery services or consumption lounges open for the foreseeable future. We're still waiting on the initial regulations, as I mentioned, so those are kind of a long way off. So what we're looking at here is really maybe the first 6 months to a year of the adult use market in New York. I have some people in the industry, just sort of sidebar here, I have some people in the industry editorializing and saying that the flower and product that these hemp farmers are going to be able to produce in these early harvests is going to be not that of the highest quality. So just keep that in mind, that maybe the early product in the retail, these conditional retail stores, might not be what we're used to seeing in a more, fully up and running state or in the medical arena. Let's see, did I miss anything there? I think I just glossed over that. Adult use retail dispensary, what is permitted selling and delivering cannabis? You can have up to 3 locations. What is not clear, because we'll get into it a little bit later, in terms of DASNY, the Dormitory Authority of New York, will be providing locations for these licenses, which is great news when you see what's been going on in New Jersey, where finding a viable property is far and away the hardest piece of opening a cannabis business. So DASNY is looking to solve that problem for these conditional retailers. It looks like, and there's still sort of a dearth of detail here, but that applicants will be able to open 1 location to start, with the other 2 locations to follow sometime later. Not sure how much later or how exactly they will, build out that 3 location permission. But it looks like applicants will be able to start with 1 DASNY provided location. All right, so what are the ongoing program requirements? Pretty similar for cultivators and processors, so I'll group them together here. The original hemp licensee must maintain at least 51% ownership interest in the cannabis license applicant or cannabis licensee. So what that means is you can go out and get additional funding by finding a partner that comes in at up to 49% interest. And that's what we've been seeing here in this early market, is existing hemp farmers and processors are partnering up with capital partners, operating partners, what have you, that take the other 49%. And another little sidebar, sort of been asked a number of times, sort of what's the value of these licenses, these early cultivator and processor licenses. And, I've been given a range, but I think sort of somewhere between $1 million and a few $1 million is sort of the value of these that we're seeing. And so the partnerships are sort of being structured accordingly. That number, I think, depends a lot on the location, how close you are to the city, and other factors. But that's sort of what we're seeing now as these partnerships come together for the cultivators and processors. You have to begin growing or processing within 6 months of receiving the license. The OCM, Office of Cannabis Management, has been pumping out these licenses fairly quickly. So, the turnaround time for submitting your application and receiving the license has been very short. And then you have 6 months to get going. The majority ownership cannot change for the duration of the conditional license period, which is 2 years. So that the original hemp owner needs to maintain that 51% for 2 years. After that, they can be diluted down. We're still waiting on a lot more filling out of the regulatory program here, though. So there may be additional restrictions, or you may be required to get authorization from the Office of Cannabis Management. But that initial restriction is at least in place. And you can't stack licenses. You can't hold more than 1 cultivator or processor license. And you can't have any financial interest in a retail license either. So no vertical integration whatsoever early on here. The micro business license that is available in New York when the regulations for it come out does allow full vertical integration, but that license is not available yet. Ongoing program requirements continued. So another 2 requirements are that you have to participate in and comply with the OCM's environmental and sustainability program. That is sort of still being developed, not a lot of detail yet. And you also have to take a leadership role in a social equity mentorship program that OCM is developing to assist other cannabis entrepreneurs, as they come into the market. Also very light on details so far, what that entails. All right, so ongoing program requirements for retail dispensaries. Again, I say thus far because we're still waiting on the final regulations. And so we'll see what all has changed or been added. But as of now, the applicant and licensee needs to be at least 51% owned by one or more individuals who are justice involved individuals, and they need to maintain that ownership for 4 years. And a justice involved individual means that either you yourself or either your parents or guardians or spouse or children or dependents. So sort of your spouse or your parent generation, kid generation, not siblings. If one of those people has a conviction, a marijuana conviction in New York from prior to March 31 of 2021, then you qualify as a justice involved individual. Has to be a New York conviction, and you had to be a resident of New York at the time of the conviction. And then, excuse me, one of those justice involved individuals must maintain at least 30% ownership and sole control of the company for 4 years. So those are pretty robust social equity requirements. 4 years is a long time, and sole control, I haven't seen that anywhere else. And so I'm curious to see how these partnerships come together with the justice involved individual and any capital partners that they bring on. Typically capital partners do want some control. So we'll see how that works when they can't have any control and the justice involved individual must have sole control for 4 years. It might make partnership structuring a bit more tricky and thus harder to get that funding partner. But on the other hand, it really does hold true to the state's social equity goals and giving these folks affected by the war on drugs a real shot to enter this market in a meaningful way. And similar to processors and cultivators, there's no vertical integration, so you can't, retail licensee or owner thereof cannot hold an interest in a cultivation or processing or any other license type. License prioritization and other social equity considerations. It's easy for adult use cultivator and adult use processor. There's really none. As I mentioned, the OCM is really, as long as applicants meet the criteria and supply all the application materials, the OCM seems to be issuing these licenses as a matter of course. There's no prioritization in terms of when your application gets reviewed, compared to another application, or there's no scoring of applications. You either get it or you don't. And so, there's really nothing there other than they're really trying to churn out, licenses at the top of this this industry, so that the supply can start growing, and so we can fill these stores when they open. A little bit different for the dispensaries. Again, it's somewhat determined, to be determined based on the final regulations. But some of the, let's see, do I have more on this on the next slide? Let me just check. Okay, no. So once an applicant meets the minimum eligibility criteria for one of these retail applications, which again is marijuana conviction, you or in the family, and at least 10% ownership of a business that was profitable for at least 2 years. So the person who has a conviction themselves or who has a family member with a conviction has to also have been a part business owner. And that business has to have been profitable for at least 2 years. Those are the minimum eligibility criteria. You also need to be significantly have significant ties to New York, but if you form a corporation or LLC to apply that's based in New York or organized in New York or formed in New York, incorporated in New York, that's enough for that prong. But the two big ones are the conviction, and that's that 10% ownership of a profitable business. Then there's additional evaluation criteria that is provided in the draft regulations that suggest that these applications will be scored, and the higher scored applications will be awarded first. And you also may have a priority in selecting what location you get, because again, a lot of these locations are already going to be set through DASNY, and it looks like they're going to perhaps allocate a certain number of the licenses within Manhattan, the outer boroughs, and upstate. So if these evaluation criteria that I'm about to tell you about will sort of help score the applications and prioritize who gets to operate where. You get more points on your application if the business owner is the same person as the person who got the conviction, rather than it being a family member. You get more points if the person who was convicted was living in an area of high crime at the time they were convicted, or an area that was disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. That gets you more points. With regard to the business ownership, you get more points if the business was retail. For obvious reasons, this is a retail business. You get more points if there was a physical presence of the business. It wasn't just an online business. You get more points if there are more employees, if the business has been around longer, if the business has been more profitable. So these are all sort of bonus points that you can get to help get a more prioritized application. We still don't know exactly how they're going to prioritize things until they come out with the final regulations, and they'll probably have a notice of application acceptance or something similar that sets the date for when these applications open. And that guidance often will tell you a bit more about the prioritization and how they'll be scoring these applications. So stay tuned, but it's clear what they're looking for is someone who's affected by the war on drugs and who has the business sense to operate a successful and profitable business that employs people. So that's what they're looking for. Here's some of the details you can read through when you're not listening to me babble. All right, summary of the application materials. For the retail dispensary, we really don't know. Obviously, you're going to have to provide all sorts of information about the applicants and owners and everything to facilitate background checks. But we don't know yet what the application documents will entail. For cultivators and processors, it's a fairly short and straightforward application. I would say it often takes more time and effort and money to bring together the partnership. If the hemp cultivator is partnering with a capital partner, that can take longer to hammer out than the application itself. But you need to disclose all owners, have a short description of the business plan and cultivation and site plan, draw out your aerial maps for where everything's going to be located on the property, and then proving that you're eligible, that you had a valid hemp license and grew and harvested hemp for 2 out of the past 4 years. And then it's a $2,000 application fee. So it's fairly straightforward. And that's all submitted online through the OCM's application portal. All right, so now we're getting into a little bit more of sort of the property and funding related side of the retail. And this is also still very much in the early stages. The development of this investment fund, $200 million investment fund, is still, out for public submission. There was a request for information that came out in March, I believe, that sort of said what the fund was going to be about and what its target amount was, and they were asking for more information about how it should be structured. And then this past month, that ripened into a request for proposals, an RFP that is currently out there and open. And that is for fund managers and investors to become apply to become a part of this fund. It's going to be a combined public and private fund with up to 50 million coming from the state and 150 million coming from private investors. They're targeting September 1st for bringing in those the private investment funds. And what this fund will be available for is to extend financing for construction, equipment, and equipping of dispensaries. Then we'll get into, let's see, I think DASNY is what we'll talk about next here. Yeah, so also through this RFP, it's an RFP through DASNY. They're the one who issued the RFP. They're also looking for contractors to run the leasing program. So how they envision this working is that DASNY will lease properties around the state as the tenant, and then we'll sublease those properties to the dispensary. And as the sublessor, they will be constructing and equipping those. So these retailers will be getting essentially turnkey facilities. And DASNY will do all site selection. And I think the RFP is to work with a leasing agent who will run that for DASNY. There's, that's still an open RFP, but I've heard a number of rumors, which are somewhat concerning, that CBRE has already sort of unofficially been awarded that contract, which would sort of violate state contract requirements, but if they were sort of given that off the books. But that's what I'm hearing. And so if that were true, commercial landlords who are looking to become part of this program would apply through CBRE for one of their sites. And if accepted, then CBRE would facilitate the subleasing of that, with DASNY as the tenant, subleasing it to the retailer. Let's see, and DASNY will sort of oversee the lease servicing, property management, and loan servicing. And again, that may be through state contractors like CBRE or others. And loan servicing, this would be loans from the fund to the retailer to construct and equip the dispensary. So there's still a lot of details that need to be filled in here. It's not clear if you must go through a DASNY property or if you can just avoid this mess and get your own property, or if you already have a property lined up, whether it's leased or purchased. It's not clear whether you can just avoid DASNY and go it alone. And like I mentioned before, it's not clear whether you will get one site or three, or one initially and two more later, and when that will happen. So we need to keep a close eye on that RFP and on the final regulations coming out for these retail dispensaries. I think there's still a lot more questions than answers in this area, but it does look like, and the rumors that I've heard that CBRE is already running this operation behind the scenes. The rumors have also suggested that, you know, one of their requirements of commercial landlords when dealing with CBRE is, will you be able to provide a fully, you know, built out and equipped facility, fully built out facility. So, you know, it looks like that is a baseline requirement that landlords will need to provide a fully built out dispensary site. And I see some comments. I'll get to those in a second. We're gonna have a nice long question and answer period here. Just a couple quick facts. There have been, as of May 19th, there could have been more, but neither myself nor my esteemed law clerk Brittany could find any more recent issuances. But 146 adult use cannabis cultivator licenses have already been granted. So seeds are in the ground as we speak, as I speak. I've heard anywhere from 100 to 200 retailer licenses are expected through this conditional retailer program. Chris Alexander, the executive director of OCM, has stated that in interviews. So, you know, I guess that's partly based on how many applicants they think qualify, but that's sort of the target, is 100 to 200 initial retailer licenses. If you want to get into the adult use cannabis cultivator or processor game in this early market, the deadline is fast approaching. It's in 15 days, end of June. That is enough time. If anyone is wondering, it's just enough time probably if you really jump into full gear. But that deadline is fast approaching. And as I mentioned, OCM is targeting the summer for opening retailer applications. Let's see, what else we got? I think that's really it. Here are ways you can contact me. And now I'm going to take a quick peek at the chat and answer any of those questions. Do we know what process means? Everyone hates that building. Yes, that building sucks. That's not a question. Processing means I did sort of cover this. If it means, you know, extraction, if you're permitted to do that under your hemp license. So whatever you're permitted, whatever processing activities are permitted under your hemp license, you can do under the cannabis processor license. You know, so that could be anything from pre-rolls to extracting the oils and producing, you know, vapes and everything like that. Will a fund be used exclusively for card licensees? I don't think so. That's a good question, Allison. It's the RFP and the RFI kind of do seem to target the retailer license types when talking about you know, the fund dollars and the DASNY properties. But I don't think that was, because this fund has, you know, this fund was in MRTA itself. And so I think it's meant to be for social equity applicants at large. And you know, there's lots of other social equity categories, like, you know, minority owners, distressed farmers, service disabled veterans, that, you know, none of them are prioritized in any of these programs. So I would think that some of the fund will be available for some of those other social equity license applicants and licensees that come later. But yeah, and as Andrew said, it might not be enough for even these card licensees. So I think this is very much a moving target, and I'm very curious to see how this RFP shakes out and how the fund gets structured. I think September 1st seems a little ambitious for getting it fully funded. And then what do we need to apply for a cultivator by the 30th? So that's what I went back to the application materials. I'll go back there real quick. Okay. So yeah, it's pretty much just, you know, ownership information, disclosure of any financial sources, licensing arrangements. Anyone who is going to be involved in the project, you need to disclose. And then you have to prove that you're eligible, that you have the right hemp license and hemp activities. And so that involves, you know, submitting your hemp license, your pre-harvest reports, your you know, planting reports. You have to submit a lot of those documents that sort of go into operating a licensed hemp operation. And then you have to have a cultivation and site plan. So, you know, we've been working on this with a client recently, and we're you know, building out the maps, the aerial maps, pointing out where all the activities will be, the growing, you know, the curing, the drying, clipping, storage. Everything needs to be identified on that site plan. You don't need any, you know, engineer drawings or anything like that. You don't need any licensed professional to do your site plan. You know, it can be a hack job with Google Earth, which is now free. And so that's what we're doing. And then it's $2,000 license fee. So, you know, it's a number of things you got to pull together, but you can do it in 15 days if you're focused on it. Yes, it needs to be New York hemp, only New York hemp, only hemp operators licensed by the Department of Agriculture and Markets as part of the industrial hemp pilot program, which started in 2018. So yeah, it's existing hemp operators that are authorized under the New York Department of Agriculture and Markets. Any other questions? I'll stop sharing my screen here so you can just see a much larger picture of me in that great building. Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to pipe up or use the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with. But you know, some of the frequently asked questions I get, there's kind of a confusing provision in the draft regs for the conditional retailers, where it has to be 51% owned by a justice involved individual, and then 30% owned by a justice involved individual. And it seems like that there's, you know, some superfluous regulations in there, and it's not real clear how those interplay with each other. And I think how that works is that you can have one or more justice involved individuals who own collectively 51%, but at least one of those people has to hold 31% themselves, or 30% themselves, and exercise sole control. And one other piece that I didn't get into here, because I haven't been, you know, dealing with it much, is it's not just justice involved individuals who are eligible for this early retail program. It's also nonprofit organizations, and specifically it's nonprofit organizations that you know, service and target justice involved individuals and other people affected by the war on drugs. And so if you're an eligible nonprofit, you can apply for this license as a 51% owner. And I think you can also, you know, if you're an individual who satisfies the criteria, you can also bring in, and you want it, let's say the structuring is such that you want to just keep that bare minimum 30% because you got to give up some other equity for funding. You can also bring in a nonprofit that qualifies to give them that extra 21%. So between you and the nonprofit, you have 51%. And then that also, means less equity for your capital partners to sort of come in and control things. So that's just sort of another thought. If there's a nonprofit partner, I could see that making sense, bringing them in to get to that 51% in the aggregate. But that's sort of another piece that I haven't dealt with the nonprofit side much yet, or talked to any nonprofits who qualify. Another question, Allison, great question. Same person needs to be just as involved and own a business. Yes, so justice involved means, that doesn't mean it was you yourself who got the conviction. Justice involved means it was you or one of your family members, parent, guardian, spouse, or children or dependents. If one of those people has a conviction, then you are justice involved. And that person, whoever's justice involved, has to be the business owner, the 10% or more business owner that was profitable for at least 2 years. And you get bonus points if it was actually the person convicted was also the business owner. So you get fewer points if the person convicted was the father of the business owner or the son of the business owner or daughter. But you get more points if it was the business owner was the person convicted. They're good questions. Let's see, keep them coming. What documentation do you need to prove your retail business owner? And does the business need to be in New York? Great questions. What documentation you need is probably going to be one of those things where it's not specifically spelled out, and you just have to convince the OCM that you did in fact own that business. So, tax returns, if you have a Schedule K1, I think that would be pretty dang good evidence. Corporate documents that show you are a 10% owner, and then financials or tax returns from the business that show profitability for 2 years. So probably a lot of tax return action. Tax returns and corporate documents is what I would say. If you don't have those, you can try piecing it together with other evidence, but signing an affidavit that where you swear under penalty of perjury that you were an owner, website, web presence with an about us and the team. I don't know. I think the best is really tax returns and corporate docs though. And does it need to be a New York business? That's actually a good question that I don't know the answer to. I will try to look it up and get back to you on that. New York business. I mean, you had to be a New York resident at the time of the conviction. Let's see, I'll try to find that. Also, just a quick, while I'm looking for that, quick plug tomorrow. So every Friday I do free office hours, 1 hour consultations from 12 to 5. But tomorrow I'm going to be doing those in person at Comeback Daily, a CBD shop in the Lower East Side. So if you're interested, or someone who might be interested in coming in and chatting with me for free, drop me a line. Should be a fun event. I'm going to try to do that once a month, host my free office hours in person in the city once a month going forward. So keep an eye out for that. But let me see. Sorry, I'm just looking for this business. qualifying business. I don't think it has to be a New York business, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna confirm now. Um, A2. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm too stressed. The pressure is getting to me. I'll get back to you on that. I don't think it has to be a New York business though. You have to demonstrate significant ties to New York as an applicant, but that means, being owned by New York residents or being formed and headquartered in New York. But that's for the retail applicant business, not the profitable business that you are at least 10% owner in. But let me just hang out until another question comes in. Let's see. Yeah, no, it just means a business that had net profit for at least 2 years, for 2 years that the business was in operation. You probably get bonus points if it was a New York business, is what I bet. So there you go. Any other questions? And if not, I'll let you guys get 10 minutes of your life back, or 8 minutes. But yeah, I'll just sort of talk more about like the rumor mill that I've been hearing. Yeah, what I've been hearing is that OCM is sort of very understaffed and underfunded. So these programs are kind of bare bones programs, in my opinion. They're great to get the market up and running, but they're pretty limited. We'll see how many retail applicants apply and get licensed, but it's going to be pretty limited product offerings and a pretty small market to start, and no real timeline for when the rest of the market will be up and running. There's been rumors about Cuomo getting back in the race, which would be bad for cannabis. He sort of wanted a handout with everything he granted in cannabis. Governor Hochul's been much more gung-ho and pro cannabis. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I'm not expecting too much action other than a lot of fanfare around these first 3 programs, to make it seem like they've done a lot when they haven't done that much. They passed that law a year and a half ago, and we still don't have draft regulations aside from these 35 pages for the retailer license regulations, and those aren't even final yet. So and then in the meantime, the gray market in New York is insane, with sort of speakeasy consumption lounges popping up left and right, camper vans selling cannabis, Delta 9, pretty blatantly all over the city, and then bodegas and smoke shops selling Delta 9 as well, that I understand is sort of flooded here from the excess on the West Coast. California, Oregon, very saturated with product. So where does that end up? At your local bodega in Manhattan. You just gotta knock right, say the right word, appear to not be a police, and you can get a pretty cheap 1/8 of products, is my understanding. So we'll see what happens with the gray market. There's been nothing but cease and desist letters sent by OCM, no real other enforcement. So we'll see what happens. I think there could be sort of a couple loud crackdowns to send messages. And I get lots of questions about people hosting pop-up events where some products are cannabis infused. Chefs who infuse foods and are putting on private dinners. There's a ton of gray market activity, and it ranges from very sort of high discretion to just totally blatant. And I think the more it becomes more and more blatant is going to force the OCM's hand. But it's such a fraught issue with the legacy market being pretty powerful in New York, and with a lot of good advocates, I would say. So and the limited resources with the OCM, do they really have the funds to enforce? My guess is no. But if the legal market takes longer and longer to really get up and running, and the gray market gets further and further entrenched and bold, who knows how this is going to shake out. And yeah, I guess in terms of like what you can be doing while you're waiting for any of the other license types, you should be asking everyone and their mother if they have a cannabis conviction, and 10% business ownership, because this is going to be a real first to market advantage for, I would say, like the first 6 months to a year. There's only going to be these retailers. So, if you know someone who qualifies, definitely mention that to them, because there's a real advantage. Let's see. Yeah, in terms of like, MSOs are definitely circling, trying to figure out how to partner with New York, New Jersey applicants. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. I'm curious to see how the partnerships develop with that retailer requirement, where the person who qualifies has to hold majority ownership and sole control for 4 years. That makes it a little trickier to make a capital partner happy, or an MSO happy. So it might lead to some more creative and somewhat suspect structurings, or sort of lots of backdoor side letter agreements, or shady things like that. But that's probably enough waxing philosophical today. Thanks for tuning in. You know how to reach me, and hope to see all you guys soon at an event or elsewhere. And hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.